Hello, and welcome to today's author discussion with the Westport Library and the writers of Almost Happy, Pushing Your Buttons with Reversed Psychology, and Elaine Daignault, Westport's own Human Services Director. We all know that laughter helps humans get through almost anything, and this book introduces the reader to a practical and accessible way to use humor to effect change. Dr. Brian Kaplan has trained and taught in many areas of personal development, including counseling, psychotherapy, voice dialogue therapy, family constellation work, and much more. He has written regular blogs and been interviewed on Sky News, BBC Radio, and LBC. Hephzibah Kaplan is an artist, art therapist, and psychotherapy supervisor who works with both children and adults. She founded the London Art Therapy Centre as a group practice and hub for arts therapies. She has previously published and contributed to art therapy literature as well. Elaine Daignault is a nationally certified mental health counselor with a 25-year history serving Westport's youth, seniors, and families in various educational and social service settings. During the pandemic, Elaine became a certified yoga instructor as well, and she continues to strive to enhance and enrich the lives of others through education, collaboration, and community building initiatives. So welcome everyone, and please tell us more about being almost happy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jen. Welcome. We're so happy to have Brian and Hephzibah here today. I read the book. In fact, I just wanted to start by showing you all the little tags I made in the book upon reading it. And as I was going through, I was like, those are me. This is someone else I know. And this is like everybody I know, the ones in the corner. So I can't stress enough how much, well, first of all, it was really fun to read and lighthearted, which I think is such a nice change from, some of the really hardcore self-help types of books that you read. So I would love to start by you telling me, where did this all come from? How did the idea to write this book come about?
Yeah, thank you so much. I was qualified as an MD some 40 years ago. And very early in my career, I went to what was then called holistic medicine. I really felt I'd been trained at medical school to treat diseases, whereas the actual reason I became a doctor was I wanted to work with people, and they didn't teach much of that. But it was fascinating. The science of medicine is a fascinating subject, but I wasn't nourished or encouraged to do the work that I really wanted to do, which was interacting with people. So I explored types of medicine that embraced the body-mind connection, but that took me so strongly into the world of mind medicine and psychotherapy and counseling, and that I just had to train. And I trained, it said you do counsel, you're trained in counseling, so you might have done similar to me. I trained in basic Rogerian client-centered therapy. And Rogers, it's funny, my big teachers, the two teachers I'm going to mention in psychological medicine are both American. Rogers is a hero of mine. I think that he's underestimated. I think his views underpin every helpline, every suicide line, every Samaritan's call. And I think his basic principles of counseling, where the practitioner needs to be warm, empathic, and genuine, are just fabulous. And they were an influence on my teacher, Frank Faraday, who taught me the provocative therapy, which is the clinical application of what we're talking about in the book. So one day I received a tear out from a magazine from a friend of mine saying there's a man that is teaching here a type of therapy where humor and jokes are used. Now I went to this seminar at Surrey University, and this was Frank Faraday from Madison, Wisconsin, the founder of provocative therapy. And within half an hour of him speaking, I was just completely mesmerized by what he said. But when he actually demonstrated live in a live module before us, this use of humor and reverse psychology, but doing it with the golden rule of provocative therapy, affection in the heart, a twinkle in the eye, the fun, the warmth of it was just fantastic. I just felt tears going down my cheeks. I realized I finally arrived home. This is my real teacher. And so from 1996 to 2013, I was a very devoted pupil, followed him around the world, took Hephzibah with me, hosted him in my house, and continued to study and develop this work. But he wrote a book in 1973 called Provocative Therapy, and it's the only textbook on this, but it is not written for the general public. It is written for professionals and academics, and it's him writing early in his career to justify what he was doing to academics and saying this is the principles behind it. The general public is not going to read this. So in this incredible use of humor, warmth, kindness, love, and jokes, there's nothing for the general public. So we determined we're going to write a book that'll be easily accessible to the general public, and that's Almost Happy.
Wonderful. So during that time when you began following Dr. Farley, you two did it together. And I know you also have a workshop that you do around this book. Is it called the Almost Happy workshop? Is that what it's called?
Well, within the context of my work, we do Almost Happy workshops, but in addition, we run a series of workshops, usually a two-parter. Dare we laugh at ourselves and dare we laugh with clients? Because a lot of healthcare practitioners, albeit might have a sense of humor, don't know how to use humor in a therapeutic context with the right protocols, in kind of ethically, consciously, carefully. And it is one thing just to laugh with the client, even to give ourselves permission to laugh with the client and all the benefits that might have. But there's something else about using humor in a very specific intervention to catalyze change.
And that's really different. I think it's really different. And I happen to love laughing and I love humor. So I think that's why I found this to be such a fun book to read and engage in, looking from kind of more my clinical perspective, but also thinking about, what my friends and loved ones might do or think when they read this book, and would they be willing to step out onto that ledge and identify themselves in one of these sort of tongue-in-cheek ways, and how that might open a dialogue for, relationships, right? All around.
Exactly. You see, the buttons are, Frank Farrelly, before he died, I showed him an early idea of making the buttons, and he loved it, but he never lived to see these buttons. So if you imagine one of those buttons as a physical button, right, here it is as a physical button. That's a physical button saying starting tomorrow.
That one's starting tomorrow, okay.
There you go,
Yep.
yes,
Love
for
it.
procrastinators.
Yep.
Now, this is what you can do with it. You can put it in your purse, and you'll see it in your purse, and you'll notice it in your purse, okay? And so it'll remind you, watch out for that voice in you that's always starting tomorrow, the procrastinator that sabotages everything. Or you could wear it. You just wear it on your lapel, just yourself. Look at yourself in the mirror wearing this badge labeled as a starting tomorrow person. Or another step, you wear it amongst close friends and family. But I do have some people who wear their badge or button, as you say in the States, in public. Even not all of them will be useful and will be suitable for public, but some are. And so that's those are the different stages. Ultimately, I would think the best thing you can do is to wear the button and say how you conquered that part of yourself from sabotaging you, and make a video of yourself. Those are the different steps that you can take. But yes, sure, not many people will read it, will wear it. But even if you recognize in the book, just as you said, you read things for yourself, and you for other people, just the recognition of reading in the book can give you a slight aha experience or a slight epiphany. Oh, there is part of me that's like that. So even if you don't ever wear it or do anything, and just recognize it, but they are available as actual physical buttons.
Something that you said just now reminds me of that idea of validation. So not just that I'm experiencing this, whether it's part of my conscious or my subconscious, right? Like we might know in the back of our heads that we're habitually late, and boy, that's not the best quality. And I would like that quality to be a little bit more quiet in the hemisphere of who I am. I thought it was really interesting because you've created a platform where people feel a commonality with another person. So if that exists in the book, wow, that must not be that unusual. And acknowledging that it's just a small piece of who I am, but it's taken over, maybe it's taking up more space than it should be. So I think that that's fascinating. And it, gives me a little bit of chills because it actually kind of puts you in a context of joining with other people and knowing that you're not alone.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to hear that that was kind of one of your responses to the book. And I think there is something about connecting with the rest of humanity and know that, let's take the example of procrastinators, since we're on it. They've always been procrastinators and they always will be. So there's something about collecting. You think about the fellowship programs, or you think about the Enneagram, you think about how clusters of people get together. And in so doing, they feel less alone. They feel more connected and more ready to sort of work on whatever might be difficult for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's shift a little bit. We talked a little bit, you talked about provocative therapy and its roots and where you came across it in your career, in your lives, and reverse psychology. So for a lay person who's, sitting and listening to us, what's the difference between provocative therapy, reverse psychology, which you hear that term all the time, and a lot of people don't necessarily know what that, I think they know what it means in general, but it is the actual approach. And then there's also cognitive behavioral therapy. So for the layperson, could you talk a little bit about how your book sort of brings all those three ideas together?
I'll start and Brian will carry on. Often people think reverse psychology is just quite a simplistic idea. You say to the child, oh, if you don't want your supper, don't eat it then. Right. That's a kind of quite a simple level. But actually what we have drawn from provocative therapy and what we have also developed ourselves is, for example, there's 36 ways to provoke people, 36 kind of nuances of reverse psychology. So one might be postpone making any sensible decisions. You're not ready for it. Another one might be looking at the secondary gain of having any particular issue. So that there are different developments in reverse psychology. It's not just doing the opposite. And I think, Brian, you were talking about the cognitive behavioral therapy concept.
Well, yes, it's interesting that you touched on cognitive behavioral therapy, in that it is behavioral. This approach, in fact, if Farrelly was naming it today, then there's a couple of pages on how he found it difficult to name the book. And I don't think provocative is the best word, because it often tends to suggest sexually provocative or just provocative, gratuitous provocation, whereas he liked the Latin provocare, to call forth the voice, you see, but that's not how always people will understand it. But it is aimed at provoking a change of behavior, as CBT is. And were he to name it now, I would have called it provocative behavioral therapy, because it is a behavioral therapy that is not going to use cognitive function. It is going to use humor and permission to use reverse psychology to provoke behavioral change. But Farrelly, on page 54 of his book, Provocative Therapy, states unequivocally, the aim of provocative therapy is to change the behavior of the client, unequivocal. So it is a behavioral, and actually I think it does bear more, it has got similarities to CBT in that you can achieve quite a bit in a few sessions. It doesn't have to go on. It's not dependent on a long, slowly developing relationship between client and psychotherapist. It's dynamic in its own right.
In the introduction, you talked about getting permission to use this kind of approach. And, the book isn't you sitting with a therapist. So I thought that was a really important component of, being able to accept this book, right? You had to kind of read the foreword to understand this wasn't, we're not making fun of you. It's sort of like that phrase, we're not laughing at you, we're laughing with you, right? Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about both the strategy that you use in your professions, right? And then also how it has been integrated into this book in a way that, you're actually telling people what you're doing, right? And oftentimes people think of a therapist or a psychiatrist or a counselor, that they have some magical thing that they're not telling you, right? And here you're being very forthright and saying, we are going to use humor. This is going to be fun. And I don't have any kind of secret magical wand behind me doing something to your brain that you don't know about. We're actually going to be really straightforward. So can you talk just a little bit about that component?
Well, I sort of going more into the kind of theoretical idea that we, you know, the single self assumption that we're not one self, we're multiple selves. I give the example, there's the part of me that wants the cheesecake, the part of me that goes, you better not have it. And then the part of me that goes, I'm going to have it anyway. And this idea that we can, those different parts, those different selves, I positions and can be satirized, can be lampooned. Can the healthy part recognize our unhealthy parts? Can we tease them together? Can we make an alliance with the client, with the reader, to go, isn't that funny how sometimes you get caught up in this sort of this behavior that doesn't serve you well, when this particular sub-self gets too loud, too dominant and overbearing sometimes. And let's try and quieten it down with some agreed, with permission, therapeutic humor.
Yes, I could add to that in the sense that, you know, I honestly believe that this approach emulates the way that people have helped other people for thousands of years. In other words, if we could go around your little part of America now and go into some tea shops and listening on conversations, you would hear psychotherapeutic processes going on, even though they're not termed counseling or therapy. They have all the qualities of that, because it is one person who loves another person or cares about them trying to help, okay? And would there be laughter? Pretty much inevitably there'd be laughter, because people who care for each other can tease each other, okay? So if we just look at this concept of laughter, you get all the physical benefits, proven physical benefits of laughter, no matter what you laugh. You can laugh at a very sophisticated thematic joke that I bring up, or you could just laugh at a doctor because he's got a fish through his head. You see, you still get all the benefits. Here, this is the crazy thing about it. You get all the same benefits from laughing at an idiot with a fish through his head as you do from a crazy joke, physically, okay? But psychologically, it's another world. Psychologically, you will feel hurt if someone is laughing at you, but if they're laughing with you, it's like, okay, we'll laugh at life together. Look at this, how ridiculous that I'm a starting tomorrow person and I've sabotaged my life. And it's just crazy that I've let that part of me sabotage. And that is why when I sit with someone and we do this work, I'm exuding goodwill. It's like Frank Farrelly said, the golden rule, if you provoke, you must do it with affection in the heart and a twinkle in the eye. Show that you're having fun, that you're playing with someone. But I go even more than affection. It's sort of, I want to exude the desire that it's the main thing in my life. I love to see people grow. I want to see you grow. And therefore, I'm prepared to use quite sharp, edgy tools with your permission to nudge you and provoke you to grow as a human being. And I want you to do it now. I want to see you flower like one of those slow motion flowers. I want to see it happen in front of me now. And sometimes we do see that.
And it's almost as if you're putting a mirror in front of somebody and allowing them to choose what they're, and I'm going to use the word label, and I'm not sure that that's the right term. So let's talk a little bit about the labels and
the buttons.
Themselves.
I never give a button to someone and say, yeah, I'm labeling you with this. But imagine I took out a few and I showed you, always hungry or starting tomorrow, or compulsive, everything in order, or news fiend, or here's a classic one. Here's a real classic one. Can't decide. All right, can't decide.
Oh, yeah.
I would just show you a tray of them and say, any of these, and people will always pick the one that the one that gets them. They love it. It's part of a person. When we ran the workshop and people choose their button, they love it. They own that part of the button. And that's what I love, because you see, these voices in you that are represented by the buttons are only powerful when you are unconscious of their hold over you. Once you laugh at them, you become conscious of them, and then they lose all their power. You can take the button and throw it back in its box because you are observing it. Once you're observing it, it can't easily do it to you anymore.
There's also, you use the word mirror. And one of the things that we're very interested in is mirrored pattern interruption. By reflecting something of yourself and something that might be difficult in yourself and reflecting it, but with humor, we can interrupt that pattern and hopefully nudge you, shift you, catalyze you into thinking about something differently.
Remember
I love
Rogers.
Go ahead.
Rogers said unconditional positive regard. That was one of the things which you could call warmth, right? Because I think you know these terms because you said you're in counseling, so you're completely familiar with this. So what he called unconditional positive regard, also warmth. But unconditional positive regard was a phrase that stuck in my mind for many years. Who's capable of unconditional positive regard? Maybe God, but it was a very high aiming thing. But I think if you're going to provoke, if you're going to use edgy stuff like these buttons or funny comments, even with permission, the unconditional positive regard needs to be turned up. Okay. It needs to be turned up for that 20, 25 minutes that we do that. And then we come out of that rabbit hole of Alice in Wonderland, and then we can just chat a bit. But we have a specific amount of time when you say, all right, let's go for it. And then I know I'm going to be funny and I'm going to say crazy things and I might use buttons, but I really try to exude care that the person just can't make any mistake that I really care. In 25 years of using this, I once had one remark, someone snapped at me for one remark in 25 years. It wasn't even a bad session, but he just didn't like one comment I made.
There was an ouch. Someone said
one
ouch.
comment in 25 years.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. So I'm glad you talked about the mirror and the fact that, this is all done out of love, right? Like, as a therapist, you want to bring out the best in a person, and as a friend or someone in a relationship. I totally agree. I think humor is the best medicine, right? You hear that all the time. And it is this idea of bringing awareness to something that maybe you didn't know existed or that was there and you never were able to put a name to it. Is it a form of radical acceptance?
Yes, I do think it's an acceptance. It's like I'm accepting the whole of you totally. I love the whole of you and I want to see the whole of you grow. But I do find it very, very amusing how this part of you is holding you back. Like, I'll give you an example of a comment I made to a lady who I'd spoken to for quite a while. And then I learned provocative therapy from Frank. And then I did a session with her. And she was a sort of person who gave a lot and then got resentful when people didn't give back to her and men messed her around and everything. And one day she came to me and she said, "Oh, Brian, I have to confess, my life is so hard. I'm drinking a bottle." This was in provocative therapy. "My life is so hard that I'm drinking a bottle of wine a night." So I said, "Oh, Mary," I said, "if I had your life, I'd drink 2 bottles of wine a night." And she fingers that moment as a breakthrough, right? That I had the courage to say that. You see, at some level, people want us not to speak in guarded language. Who likes someone talking to them when they're walking on eggshells? I better say something might be politically incorrect. If I use this word, will that go down all right? They don't want that. They want the authentic human being, right? But as you say, as you've made it clear at the beginning, you do need to get permission. You do need to say, "Can I talk to you in a style that in any other context could easily be seen as a bit abrasive, rude, sarcastic, ironic, funny, irreverent, etc." And then they say, yes, get on with it.
So that example you gave is the "I need to be needed" button. Is that right? The "I need to be needed."
Yes, that would suit her. Yes.
You can see I have that one kind of.
We love how you've done that in the book, and you read it.
Oh yeah, I did my homework.
Read it.
I did my homework. And so those chronic givers and do-gooders who apparently expect nothing in return for their wise advice and loving deeds. I love that, right? I think we all whether we're a parent, probably mostly parents, right, have that experience every day, right? We are always in the realm where we're the caregiver and people are relying on us. So, wow, I can totally see, I am guilty of this, of you could get very burnt out by being that person all the time and allowing that to be the loudest voice, right? The loudest piece of your sub-self. And so,
Exactly. You know, I remember Frank Farrelly talking to a fellow provocative therapist from Belgium who happens to be a very close friend of ours. And she said she's always the one that sometimes has to point out to people that they're doing things wrong and that they, you know, that they slack and everything at work. And then it's like people resent her and, you know, and she went on about this. And Frank just said, no, it's a terrible job that you've got, but someone's got to do it. Can you imagine this world? People are like jellyfish. They'll do nothing without someone like you that walks into a room. We need people like you that walk into, as soon as you walk into the room, everyone's on red alert when you walk in. He says, look, I know it's a terrible job. And I know the people that you talk to would prefer that you go and practice on somebody else, but someone's got to do it. Keep doing it, you see? And then she thinks, oh, well, maybe I should quieten down a little bit or be a bit softer.
and she doesn't take it, you know, she doesn't turn around and become more overbearing and more controlling, right? Yeah, because you said here, just ignore all of those allegations that you might be controlling or you might be smothering someone or suffering. Just ignore it and just do your thing. How could, you know, how could you logically do that? So it's such a, again, it's provocative, right? It's like, that's really looking at it from a different lens. And you also talked about sort of the more holistic look and thinking more about wellness, not as labeling your illnesses or perhaps your you know, mental health disorder or whatever. You're taking it, looking at it from, you know, the whole person and what makes you whole and what wellness. How do you define wellness? And, you know, from this perspective, what would you say would be, you know,
well, to me,
almost happy, right?
To me, it's a matter of body, mind, and spirit. Okay, so you know, you need to, you know, that you need to be paying attention to your body and physically. You know, that a lot of, if you're in pain, then it's not easy to be well. Okay, psychologically, well, I think is about purpose. You know, that the saddest thing I ever hear from any client or patient is there's no purpose in life, no function, right? To feel that you're doing something that has meaning for you is really, really important. And you would have noticed that one of the last buttons in the book is the voice of conscience. Now, that's not a sabotaging voice. That's what's left when all the other loud shouting voices quieten down. You can then be in touch with your own conscience. If you can get out of the voice, if you can quieten down the voice that's a critic or that's compulsive or whatever, and you quieten down those voices, then this voice emerges. That's the voice of conscience. And if you behave according to that, then you will be quite a different person and you will not listen to these other loud voices that are part of you, or they will quieten down, because the voice of conscience, the power of the voice of conscience is paramount. It's higher than anything else. It may even be, and that's where it maybe connect to spiritual, is the part of us that knows something that's between right and wrong, that makes us different from animals, is conscience. That's what has to emerge. But we can do it by laughing at these other jeering, shouting voices. That underneath it all is this conscience. And when we act according to our conscience, then we feel much happier and more fulfilled in ourselves, and may even have a spiritual element, because some people
self-actualized, right? You almost become, you see the person you can be, and then you can embrace that person.
That's it.
Through this. Wow. That's powerful.
Yeah, that was another American that impresses us, is Abraham Maslow, who spoke of these hierarchies and self-realization. Yeah, exactly.
So as you were talking, and I feel like I'm always stealing this little phrase from a colleague of mine who you know, said something in the context of a talk that he was giving, and he said, you know, someone asked him what the definition of mental health is. And what he said was, the definition of mental health is that you feel lovable, you feel capable, and you feel connected. And I thought of your book as I was I think of your book when I hear those phrases, because that's really what this is about. All of your quirkiness, right? Those quirks are what make you lovable, right? And it's what connect you to other people. So, I thought that was powerful and interesting. And then I was thinking, so the timing of this book is just coming out, right? It's like fresh off the presses. How long were you working on it?
It's been a journey of 20 years.
Wow.
And the story in itself is kind of what's interesting for us. But it was always something about, just kind of relating it back to mental health.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a book necessarily for unwell people.
Right.
This is a book, for everybody, we hope. And there's something about Brian Flash, the can't decide button. And we are all kind of get caught up in the paradox of change. We want change and we don't want change. So it's not just about kind of perhaps it's about one's relationship with oneself as well as others. Because when we are conflicted and we're fighting inside ourselves,
mm-hmm.
that kind of fight can also be satirized and teased to wake up to that sense of consciousness and responsibility and accountability. So can we provoke through humor and that sense of agency, because you know what it is that you need to do, and can we kind of just give you a bit of gusto, a bit of confidence to just take that on board?
Yeah, take an example of a classic line. I mean, there's certain classic lines in the book that I would always use if someone came to me. Like, for example, if anyone comes with a marital problem and they give me permission to do this, I always say the same line because it always has an effect. And the line is, oh, my heart goes out to you if you're unhappily married. It must be horrific to be unhappily married because I'm happily married and it's terrible.
I love it.
Yeah. So now so that sounds weird and funny and everything, but it's actually true. It's actually true. Anyone who's been in a long marriage and successful knows that there are terrible moments that have to be overcome, etc. So it's not untrue. It has some inherent truth there, but it's exaggerated and it changes. And another classic is someone drinks. I mean, drinking is a massive issue, a massive issue. I had a button in the book called Tweaker for methamphetamine addicts, but only 28 million of them in the world. So that was not the billions of drink. But, of all the reverse psychology statements to do with alcohol, drink is the curse of the working man, work is the curse of the drinking man, all those things. By far the best quote, the best one I ever said to anyone was, I understand why you drink. You drink to make other people interesting.
Yes. I love it. I love it. So the timing of the book, I think, is interesting. And, 20 years of love going into this book, and the time in which it came out, and a time in which we've all felt a tremendous amount of fear, isolation, lots of time for self-reflection, and perhaps a time where some people kind of, had some aha moments over the course of, being on lockdown with COVID, and maybe starting to acknowledge or recognize things in themselves that maybe weren't as prevalent because they were moving and shaking, and, life is so busy, and the pace of our world slowed down so much. So this book coming out now, I think really makes it's kind of, what great timing, right? Because we've all had these moments of self-reflection, and we're trying to get back into our regular routines, and how easy it is to fall back into some of these, bad habits or behaviors that encompassed us, and maybe we had a reprieve, and now we're going right back into the grind. So are there what do you think about that? Would you agree with that statement that the timing, I think, is really quite good?
I'm very much in agreement. For the past couple of years, we've been working on Zoom, hearing the testimonies and stories of people struggling, increased addictions, relationships falling apart. And there've been other people that have been privileged enough to be able to complete their novel and decorate their house. And then there've been those who really establishing their priorities, like the relationship isn't working, or they value the time they've spent with their kids. So I think when you bring people nearer, or people have nudged themselves nearer to that kind of sense of responsibility about their lives, let's hope they're more receptive to thinking about it more deeply.
And people are ready to have some fun. You know, they're ready to be,
We hope that.
they're ready to be a little bit more lighthearted and kind of look at things not so seriously, because in the scope of our world, right? These little quirks we have are what make us special. And I love that you're raising the idea of let's use humor, let's laugh about it. Let's see
exactly what you said about energy. You see, it's that I remember R.D. Lang talking about therapy on a clip that I saw him on YouTube, and he said this is the ideal energy to have in the room. There needs to be a vibration there, not this is our feeling. That's, in other words, this is what I want. If I'm talking to someone, I want to feel a slight buzz. This is important. This is exciting. Not, oh, I'm quietly going to reflect and deeply intellectually understand my life. I want an aha moment now. I want an energetic, I want to look forward to being in an energetic environment if I'm going to talk to someone. And I want to be lifted. I want to get a potential in the room of how I can feel.
Yeah. So liberation, you're liberating yourself from all of those things, right? That have been kind of dragging you down.
Yeah, but it's a new way. Everyone goes to comedy for liberation, for laughter, and to laugh at society. But many comics are just laughing at, comedians are just making jokes about, have you ever noticed that when you've got a flat tire in your car? But every now and then a comedian comes, such as Lenny Bruce, such as Bill Hicks, such as, that really takes a chance, really challenges society, really holds up a comic mirror to society, okay? And that's the key. The top social comedians are deeply ideological people. They deeply care about society, deeply. And they want to change society using satire and using humor. What hasn't been said is that this can be done in a clinical setup, in medicine, in therapy. It has this power. In other words, so Jonathan Swift, when he wrote Gulliver's Travels, which is my favorite satire of all time, he also wrote a very short book called A Modest Proposal, where he proposed that the starving people of Ireland sell 1-year-old babies to be made into food as a solution to and he doesn't apologize. In my book, it says, in our book, it says, warning, don't read this book if you're, there's no warning in Swift's book. He writes it in an officious style, actually in a very over authoritarian style, suggesting this is a very viable way of the Irish dealing with the famine in their country. Right. So this is satire for society, and people do appreciate that. The top comedians always do that, and the top writers, and Shakespeare and many others, they definitely do that. But this is in medicine. How can we harness the power of satire in medicine? Not by making fun of the patient or the client, but by making fun of that part of themselves, that sub-self or that sub-personality that's grabbed the microphone within them and is making them do things that are not serving the whole well at all.
And it can be very simple, very, very simple. So often I work with women in their sort of 20s and early 30s, and they might not yet have broken free from the sort of restrictions of the family, and they don't have enough confidence. And one of my favorite lines, and it's very effective, is when they say, look, I just don't think I have the confidence, I'm feeling judged all the time. And I usually say, well, the good news is by the time you're 60, you won't have this kind of yoke around your neck. You will be free of it. So you can wait until you're 60 if you like.
Right.
It will happen.
Right.
And then they go, oh, I need to do something about it.
Yeah, now might be a better time to address this. Well, I was actually going to end with some questions. Well, I was curious who your favorite comedians are. Clearly you love comedy. Maybe you have a favorite show. maybe there's and again, you're from, you're in England, so are there any comedians or specific shows
Plenty.
that you like to watch?
Well, we think that Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld are geniuses, right? So I think that you too. Yeah, okay. So I mean, I'm watching Seinfeld from the beginning again. I've watched every Curb Your Enthusiasm, and I just think that shows humanity and our foibles and how we behave and how we act with self-interest. Seinfeld particularly, and also Curb, which is fantastic.
Frasier.
Frasier was big for my son and wife.
Yeah.
Frasier,
Absolutely.
and in real life, Lenny Bruce. You see, because I think everything that Lenny Bruce said then would be considered tame even by today's standards, and yet he was taken away by police and locked up and sued and court cases. But I think he made some wonderful lines when he says, "Everywhere the people are." What did he say? Leaving the churches and turning to God, or something,
Right.
or leaving the temples and turning to God.
Right.
And and I just think I sense in him an ideologue, sensing there's something really wrong here, and I'm going to hold up a comic mirror. Those are the big, the powerful comedians, and they will always be controversial, just like Dave Chappelle is controversial, but he is brave in coming forward and saying these things. And this is part of what we want to say. It takes courage to use humor. Even when you've got permission and talking to a client, it still takes courage to say the provocative thing. And the client, our experience is the client appreciates that it was hard for you to say that. He appreciates you not walking on eggshells, but actually using the same language as used in the street and everywhere else, and in comedy, of course. But and often in comedy, there are people that can get hurt, but here the comedy is not directed against people. It's directed against these sub-personalities that have become too loud. But others, Mel Brooks, massive fan of Mel Brooks.
Oh yeah.
I like the black humor of the Coen brothers, Joel and Ethan Coen. My son liked the humor of Friends. I never totally got into that in the same way as Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm. Who else do we love?
Well, there's all the British comedians. So Brian's interviewed, actually it's really interesting, he's interviewed leading British comedians about their health in a sort of podcast called Are You Feeling Funny? And
that's your podcast, Dr. Kaplan? That's your podcast?
It's called Are You Feeling Funny? It was made by a radio team. They really were keen to make this. It's called Are You Feeling Funny? Where I interview really top comedians, people such as, there may not be names in America, such as Stuart Lee, Shapi Kushani, the top British comedians I interviewed on this program. And I'd like to extend it. And on Sunday night, this coming Sunday night, I'm going to be interviewing a comedian live on stage. I haven't done that before. I interviewed them in my surgery in Harley Street. That's where I interviewed the comedians. But we're going to do it live on stage on Sunday night. So I love talking to comedians. Comedians are my heroes. They give me lines. They teach me timing. And I can quote them as long as you attribute the quote to the comedian. You can say what you like. Like a very, very close friend of mine is a comedian called Arnold Brown, and he's a Jewish comedian from Scotland. And he says, "You should always say about me, I'm both Scottish and Jewish. That's two racial stereotypes for the price of one." Okay. And he says, but he's got a line, there's another line of his, you see, that I quote him. I don't own the line. Mostly I don't quote, right? But there are a few quotes that I use. But one of his quotes is, he says, one of his quotes that I love, he says, "Sometimes I look at the stars and think how significant I am."
Love it. I love it.
So
So I just wanted to say thank you for taking this time. This was actually a lot of fun. Dr. Brian Kaplan and Hephzibah Kaplan from the book, Almost Happy. I urge people to come and check it out. I think it was a lot of fun. And I'm grateful for your time. And I love that there's other ways that we can get to know you through the Are You Feeling Funny podcast. And then Almost Happy also has a website, correct? So people can go on, learn a little bit more find out how to get the book. And I wish you well. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. Been lovely talking to you. You really read the book and absorbed what we tried to convey. And that was a great pleasure to talk to you because you've done that. I really appreciate that.
And we'd love to send you some real buttons. So if you want to
Oh,
let
we'd
us
love
know,
that.
we'll send you a little gift bag of buttons.
Oh, that would be lovely. Thank you. We'll all wear them in the office, depending on the
Excellent.
day, right? Like I'm feeling late today. I'll wear that one every day.
That sounds wonderful. And on behalf of the Westport Library, thank you, all three of you, for a fantastic explanation of Almost Happy and how we can look at the world a little differently now that, you know, using some of these ideas, I think will be great. And for those of you watching this, Almost Happy can be found either at your local bookstore or at the Westport Library. So please come and check it out.